Welcome, class, to part 2 of lecture 3. So we left off right before our break discussing fake news and how to identify this news. And I think it's a little important to go further in detail here because it's so crucial for you writing your assignments and doing your own research. So today we'll go over the tools to identify good and legitimate sources. So often we're looking for sites, for instance, for websites that have .com, .eu, .org, .gov, and we want to look for sources like this, and not, for instance, one that's ending in Montenegro, Macedonian, Ukrainian, etc. Sources, right? So for example, you might not want a .ru or the Russian domain, especially if you're looking at issues related to, American politics or issues related to Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict, because we can assume that this source will probably be highly biased. Russia being a liberal state would likely have tight controls over the media, etc. So you will likely receive inaccurate, or there's the high potential for inaccurate information from such sites. So I would recommend using the library databases for your research. Academic articles or recognized reliable news sources would be the strongest ways to back up your claims in your assignment. You can also use the CRAP test. So currency, relevance, accuracy, authority, and purpose. If any of these these aspects seem to jump out at you while you're reading an assignment, if you're wondering what the relevance or the accuracy or the authority of who's speaking, you might not wish to use this site as an authority. You can verify information to see if this claim is supported by other news sources. So if you find, let's say you find an article that says something fabulously extraordinary or ridiculous. The communist Justin Trudeau plans to imprison unvaccinated Canadians, for instance. You might wish to see if other news sources also are reporting on such an event, right? To see if this claim is accurate, or if it's just a fake news or propaganda that's designed to infuriate or mobilize a particular audience. So you can Google the claims or facts that you discover to see if other news sources report, or any media sources report on a particular fact that you discover. If you don't see this discovery or revelation elsewhere, we can assume it's likely made up. So if you're not finding that Justin Trudeau is planning to imprison unvaccinated Canadians from any site other than a far right-wing leaning fake news outlet, then we can probably assume that he's not planning to do so and that this information is inaccurate, right? We also might look at the ads. What type of ads are on the site? We might assume that a biased or fake news source that's claiming every day that the sky is falling and that nuclear war is minutes away. Such a news source might sell things such as apocalypse survival kits, for example, or home security systems. That would mean that there's an economic interest for perhaps why they're giving this catastrophic news each and every day, or they're constantly fear-mongering is often the term. You might also wish to see whether the information you're receiving is coming from a nonprofit or a think tank, which has a particular political objective. For example, an American libertarian or pro-free market think tank, as they're often called, might produce articles that discuss the misuse or misappropriation of tax dollars or public funds or any large public project as a way to delegitimize state spending, or even philosophically delegitimize the taxation, systems of taxation by the government. So we can see, because in their approach, they're radically free market fundamentalists. They would deny any legitimacy of the state having any role within the economy, et cetera, right? So you might wish to take also a close look at the author or journalist that you're receiving this information from. So you could Google the author to see if you can identify a certain bias or themes in their past work, or whether others view this author as a reputable source of information. For example, if your source on information on US-China trade relations is someone like the American nationalist Peter Navarro, the former assistant to Donald Trump, well, if you Google him, you can see he spent a career highly critical of any form of economic, diplomatic, or political relationship with China, and is extremely hostile to the Chinese government, writing numerous books and articles such as Death by China, or The Coming China Wars, or Crouching Tiger, all of which are deeply critical of all aspects of Chinese governance, and any relationship with the Chinese state. As such, we might view someone like him uh, as an unfair, we might view him as a very biased authority if we're looking into something like China-US geopolitical relations, right? So you want to be on the lookout for that as well. Legitimacy of the source is just one issue. The other issue is bias. So even Thomas Jefferson, who we discussed in the previous lecture, in the previous part, who's the American founding father, who spoke famously about the importance of the press, became very critical of press biases when he came into office. So we can see that bias is also something that people are very critical of. We can assume that everyone, however, has a certain level of bias. We're all political creatures, and we all have certain political attitudes and biases that shape our news consumption and how we understand the news that we're consuming. In many countries, it's assumed that your news source would match your ideological and political party affiliation. For example, if you're an American Bernie Sanders supporter or a Jeremy Corbyn supporter in the UK, you might be looking at more social democratic or socialist news sources, such as Jacobin Magazine or the Monthly Review. If someone is a conservative, they might be reading something like the Times of London or Foreign Affairs. If someone is far right-wing leaning, you might see them look at sites such as Breitbart or the Daily Mail or Fox News or Drudge Report. And if we know if someone is a centrist, might look at articles, or a centrist liberal might look at something like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Guardian. So we can see that, many of those who have certain political affiliations will often drift towards certain media sources. The key, however, is acknowledging your bias and accounting for it. And being open to reading other points of view which you might disagree with or might contradict your beliefs or your claims. The objective is for you to understand your own political biases and willing to critically examine the information or claims which you might agree or disagree with. The problem with much of media is that they claim that there is zero bias in the reporting. And when audience do discover bias, it undermines the legitimacy of important factual information that they might be producing. For example, like I mentioned before, the failure of the media to correctly report on the accuracy of the information from the state claiming that weapons of mass destruction were in Iraq, which was proven to be untrue, led many of the US and beyond to distrust both American political leadership as well as the American news media, which failed to expose the inaccuracy of these claims that contributed to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. So a key question is whether the media, more generally, is left or right-wing leaning. This is a very complex issue because many news sites also contain a range of opinions and political opinions. For example, a centrist publication such as The Guardian or Globe and Mail might also include articles which are a range of articles which vary deeply in their opinion on a particular issue or their framing of a particular issue. That being said, overall, we can make the broad generalization that overwhelmingly, and specifically in the traditional corporate news media, that opinions tend to be what is called center-left or liberal leaning. However, this is not always the case. This has led some to dismiss or call news media as liberal or left-leaning institutions, which are all biased in this way. Well, this is not always the truth. As many of the news institutions are owned by billionaires, such as Rupert Murdoch or Jeff Bezos, who tend to be, due to their economic interests, more right-wing or conservative-leaning. So you have owners of major news outlets who tend to be more right-wing, and journalists which tend to be more left-leaning and liberal. And this is a contradiction which continues to pose a problem for modern journalism and the ability for journalists to do their work unconstrained by powerful forces and hierarchies within this institution. Forces which often mirror the inequality of wealth and power within contemporary society as a whole. So acknowledging the presence of bias, fake news, and the various issues facing contemporary journalism in the 21st century helps the critical reader, such as yourselves, or the critical consumer, examine contemporary events while also recognizing the multiple ideological filters or lenses which frame such events. In your search for factual information, especially in the field of global business, you will need to know how to test and verify the information that you receive and recognize the various factors which shape the information content which you are consuming in an environment of almost ceaseless information and news sources, right? Especially with the advent of online media. In your next assignment, you will look at a particular issue through three different sources and see how this shapes the information you read about a particular topic. So that will be part of your assignment. So this is very, very important. Okay, onto the media map. This chart is very interesting because it provides a broad ideological mapping of news sources available online. We can see here that the various ideological right-wing news sites are less devoted to factual truth. So we can see here, at the bottom right, we see the, Breitbart, Daily Wire, the Blaze, etc. So this is more extreme conservative and contains lots of inaccurate, fabricated information. The same way we can see at the top, you find more accurate and neutral reporting. So this is just a guide to help you as you're looking through different news sources. And you might wish to use this chart during your assignment, or just have it open so you have an idea of where each source tends to stand in the ideological spectrum, and as well as on the spectrum of fact-based reporting or inaccurate or fabricated information. So yeah, just keep that one open when you're doing your assignment, and I think it'll be a big help to while you're doing your research. Media also plays an especially important role in geopolitics because many of the global issues which are most relevant to us are occurring very far away from our day-to-day lives. For example, the geopolitical tensions which are producing rising gas prices currently are tensions which are highly complex and in countries which are both far away and often have different languages, political systems, cultures from our own. So it is up to the national news media to help countries and their populations understand how such geopolitical events impact our day-to-day lives and how our national politics or our policies at home might impact those outside of our nation state. The Vietnam War, the Cold War, the Afghanistan War, these events were all covered, shaped public opinion, and the media helped shape the public opinion regarding such events. For example, the media's role in covering the atrocities of the United States during the Vietnam War, specifically the My Lai massacre and the reporting of Seymour Hersh, helped drive Americans away from supporting the war at home. Similarly, public opinion about the Afghanistan conflict became increasingly critical as journalists exposed key issues regarding the scope and cost of this mission, leading to the end of the war. So we need to ask what groups are framed as in a sympathetic light as well. For example, some news agencies might view certain actors as terrorists or criminals. Another source might frame the very same actors as freedom fighters or democratic protesters. We can see this in countries such as Venezuela, Syria, Cuba, etc. In Western news media, we find similar things. The Black Lives Matter protests, for example, were covered by more liberal leaning news sites as legitimate uprisings based on legitimate concerns and demands for social justice by African Americans in light of various police shootings of unarmed black men and women. Right-wing or conservative news outlets would often frame the very same protesters as illegitimate, as vandalizing criminals, or even terrorists or instigators. So we can see here that the political affiliation or the political ideology that of a particular news site frames these complex issues and will attribute different labels to the actors involved as well. So we should be sure to identify what actors are being vilified and why they might be vilified by a particular news source. Could it be due to a political party affiliation, for example, or the base of their or the ideological base of the consumers of their media source, right? So do note that there is also crucial underreporting about issues and how this also shapes our opinion. Many have noted how Ukraine, for example, has received far more attention globally than many other conflicts in the global South, which have also had an enormous human toll. Many note how the conflicts and atrocities in Yemen and Congo, for example, are far less reported than those conflicts which are in the proximity to Europe, such as Ukraine. So it is important then to recognize the media often underreports certain issues and that these issues are also important. The reasons such issues are omitted may be for a specific purpose. So for instance, the Washington Post under Jeff Bezos' ownership might be underreporting labor issues at Amazon. And we shouldn't dismiss that these issues are important just because they're underreported within certain news sites. We might ask why these issues are being underreported within a particular news source. The same way Russian state media might underreport war crimes within Ukraine by Russian soldiers, et cetera. So we can see here that the underreporting is also, the crimes of omission are also very important here. Most people have a very limited knowledge of geopolitics due to the limitations of the news media to cover all relevant issues facing society, as well as, like we mentioned before, the limited time and attention span of individuals to consume media. Many of the less exciting but crucial aspects of geopolitics and global development tends to be ignored and replaced by more exciting news. Many will glance over very important articles discussing national trade, financial, or labor policy, often for more eye-catching and enticing information regarding, for instance, wars, coups, uprisings, protests, etc., right? So the overwhelming coverage of more immediate conjunctural events in our news media often distracts from the slow-moving geopolitical processes which help shape our day-to-day lives. So I would like to end today with some things to think about. So we wanted some issues. This is how I would end most of my lectures if we were meeting in person, just some food for thought. So think about how much bias there is in the news media. What direction is this bias? How can international affairs be covered more effectively or in a more unbiased manner? How dangerous is the growth of fake news? How much have you experienced this fake news in your own media consumption? Is geopolitics not covered because people don't care, or do they not care because it's not covered? That's a key question. Is the issue of these underreported stories that people just dismiss them or find them boring, or that journalists themselves are not covering these important issues deeply enough? So these are just all things to think about. Okay, moving on, just before we end here, your media assignment is up on Blackboard and it's worth 20% of your grade. You have to answer 5 of the questions. Read the instructions very carefully. Remember to follow the APA instructions and cite all information used. Remember, it is not due this coming Friday, but the Friday of June 3rd. So June 3rd, due date. That gives you lots of time to work on this assignment, and so do not leave it to last minute. You must must paste the honesty statement to the document that you submit to turn it in. So all in one document, you copy the honesty statement, the academic honesty statement, to the document that you submit to turn it in. Failure to do so will mean a deduction in grade, and I will not accept this form through email for this assignment. So you must submit it to within the same document that you submit to turn it in. There is no separate link on Blackboard. You must submit it in the very same document that you submit your assignment. So please make sure you, before you turn it in, just remember that you must paste the academic honesty statement. Use APA style, like I mentioned. And one last thing, there's no office hours this week for Victoria Day. So there will be no office hours on WebEx between us. I will not be there. If you have a crucial issue that you must speak with me about about this assignment, etc., you can email me and we can set up a different date, or we can just meet during my office hours the following Monday. But this Monday, we will not have any office hours. So just keep that in mind. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to our next week's lecture. Take care, everyone.